It's clear as day that Omicron is in India and that we will have an Omicron wave very soon. What's not certain is how big this wave will be, how long will it last, how many will get impacted, and what you and I should do to be safe. That is most crucial. What we've done on this special edition of the Newstrack is line up 3 of the world's top epidemiologists, experts in infectious diseases who will be joining us to talk about Omicron's threat, presence in India, and what you need to do to be safe. I'll have Professor Ian Lipkin joining us, one of the world's most famous virologists. We'll have Professor Brahma Mukherjee joining us from the University of Michigan. Her modeling on this whole COVID pandemic has been recognized and looked at very closely the world over. But my first guest on this broadcast is Dr. Ashish K. Jha. He's the Dean of the Brown University School of Public Health, one of the world's top experts on infectious diseases. Dr. Jha, welcome. It's good to have you back on the show, but there's also a sense of deja vu because we're now bracing for Omicron. You're seeing what's happening in the UK, you're seeing what's happening in the US. Based on your wealth of experience and the data that you're studying, give our viewers a sense of what they should expect over the next few weeks and months when it comes to Omicron hitting India. Dr. Jha, welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Rahul, for having me back. And there is a little deja vu, but I want to start off by saying we are in a different place than we were a year ago. India is in a different place than where it was a year ago. Here's what I think people should expect. What we're seeing in country after country is a very sharp rise in cases. I think that will happen in India in the upcoming weeks. India will probably see a large wave of infections. Tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of Indians getting infected. The question is, what will the consequence of this be? And here, I think things will look very different from the Delta wave that India had earlier in this year, early in March, April, and May. That's for 2 reasons. One is, of course, there's a lot of natural immunity, infection-induced immunity from the Delta wave. But the second big reason is India has done an extraordinary job of vaccinating its population. Really, really amazing where India is today compared to where it was 10, 11 months ago. That combination means it will be much milder for most people. If you're unvaccinated and have not had a prior infection, it may not be milder. For everybody else, it will be milder. Still problems. We have things to do right now India needs to be doing to get ready. But I think this will be very different than the Delta wave that India unfortunately suffered through earlier in the year.
I'm hearing 2 different kinds of opinion. The first is, yes, there'll be a sharp spike, a rapid fall, but that would be where the pandemic ends. The other point of view seems to be that there's no guarantee that the pandemic is ending because many parts of Africa, Latin America still have very low vaccination levels, and that there could be some new super mutant that comes from one of these countries with low vaccination levels, bad hygiene, and therefore there could be an other mutant as well. Is there any way for you to be able to answer that question with some sense of firmness?
Yeah, so I don't think that this ends the pandemic. And here's the big picture point people need to know. There isn't one day or one moment where we all get together and say, okay, pandemic is over. Pandemics fade into the background. And what will happen coming out of Omicron is so many people are going to get infected that we will build up even more population immunity. Will there be another mutant, another variant? Quite possibly, maybe even likely. But that one will have even a less of an impact. So Omicron will have less of an impact on the population than Delta. The next one will have even less than Omicron. And slowly but surely, these waves will come. They'll be smaller, less impactful. And in the long run, they will not continue to harm us and the population of India and population of the world in the way that Delta did, or even the way Omicron will. Every wave will get less and less important.
If so many people have been vaccinated in countries like the UK and others in Europe, then why is Omicron doing the kind of damage that it is? Why is it that immunity which had been built up against the COVID pandemic doesn't seem to be holding out against Omicron?
Yeah, I would actually say I think it is holding up, and let me tell you why. The immunity against Omicron, the problem with Omicron is it has so much vaccine escape or immunity escape that it is causing infections in people who are already vaccinated. However, they're not getting sick at very high rates. This is why I expect many Indians like many Americans, many Europeans, will get an infection despite being vaccinated. However, the consequences of those infections is going to be much, much milder. So what we're seeing in Europe is two things happening. One is you're seeing a lot of infections still in unvaccinated people. Those people are getting very sick. But you're also seeing a lot of infections in vaccinated people, and those people are doing largely fine. They're not getting very sick. They're not going to the hospital. So vaccines are working great at preventing severe illness. That's the most important goal of vaccines.
If you were advising the Indian government at this moment, there is opinion split about whether we should action a booster dose immediately. Should we hold out? What do you think would be the right strategy when it comes to booster doses for vaccines?
Yeah, for me, the data on this is quite clear. Looking at the data coming out of the UK, out of Europe, US, South Africa, I think high-risk people need a booster. So if I were advising the Indian government, I would say identify your high-risk people, people over 60, people with significant chronic disease, and get them a booster. I think that's very important in protecting them, because when they have a breakthrough infection, if I have a breakthrough infection, I'm a relatively healthy person, it'll be very, very mild. A 70-year-old with heart disease who has a breakthrough infection can be quite serious. So I would say get boosters for the high-risk people. I would also get boosters for healthcare workers. And the reason is, even if their disease is mild, if many healthcare workers get sick very, very quickly, even if they're mild disease and they're at home for 5 or 10 days, it will make it hard to run hospitals with many people out. So I would focus on healthcare workers. I would focus on high-risk people. I would get them a booster. I don't think at this point, with limited supply, I don't think everybody else needs a booster right away. Again, if we have plenty of vaccines, there's no downside. We should probably get boosters for everyone else. But I would make that a second priority. First priority are those other groups.
No, because in a country like India, our current vaccine manufacturing capacity and ability to distribute across our supply chain is much more than the current requirement of vaccine. So many people are wondering, if it's been 5 or 6 months since we've had our second dose and our immunity is low, and here is a variant which is escaping immunity and is not being fought off by the vaccine, why shouldn't I get a booster, sir?
I actually think people should. So what I would say is start with the priority groups. Start with the high-risk people, healthcare workers. If you can get them all boosters and you still have plenty of vaccines left, yeah, absolutely. Also think about children. India has not been vaccinating kids. That group also needs vaccines. So highest priority, boosters for those high-risk groups. Second priority is boosters for everybody else, as well as original shots for children. That should be the strategy right now in India.
So there are two theories on booster doses. For example, if someone like me got Covishield the first 2 times around, some people are suggesting that you should try and get a Moderna or a Pfizer vaccine because it's a different kind of vaccine, it will build a different kind of immunity. Some others would say it doesn't really matter, Pfizer and Moderna aren't available in India, take what you get. Which one do you think is right?
Yeah, so there is a theoretical benefit of mixing and matching a booster. But the data on this is pretty clear that it's really important to get that third shot. That's much more important than which third shot you get. So I personally, there are plenty of boosters available in the United States. I got a booster, same shot as the first 2. I don't think it's critically important that you mix and match. If it's available, sure, do it. But the benefit is marginal. The most important thing is high-risk people need to be getting a booster.
The government is currently of the view that children don't need vaccines. I've got young children. Many who are watching at this time have children of different ages, and they're very anxious because schools have started opening up. Kids are going back to school, and if it's safe, we'd really like to get our children vaccinated. Does it make sense to delay vaccination for children, or should they just be given the vaccines which have been approved for them?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that the data is very clear. Kids need to get vaccinated. I don't have any questions about it. I have 3 children. They've all been vaccinated. I think that's the right answer. And the reason is, while it is true that kids are at lower risk than adults, they're still at some risk. And these vaccines are very safe. They're very effective. And there is no reason not to be vaccinating kids, except if you don't have enough vaccine supply. But again, India has done an amazing job on vaccine supply and making vaccines. So I would move forward on vaccinating kids. I think that's an important thing. One other thing, though, Rahul, I don't think you need to wait for that to open schools. We know how to get schools open and be safe without vaccine. So vaccinate kids, absolutely. Open schools, absolutely. Do you have to wait for vaccinations? You don't. You can open schools now, but definitely get the kids vaccinated.
Thank you very much for joining us. We've had an interesting conversation. You've added a lot of insights, and these are very deeply researched, thought out insights. So I'm grateful that you could join us. I wish you a Merry Christmas. Maybe it's not such a Merry Christmas, but nonetheless, we must do with friends and family what we can. And for your time, Dr. Ashish Jha, thank you. I want to go across now to Professor Brahma Mukherjee. Professor Brahma Mukherjee is the Professor of Epidemiology, and she's at the Chair of Biostatistics at the University of Public Health, University of Michigan. She's been doing some deep data regressions analyses on what Omicron could look like in India. Professor Mukherjee, great to have you back. Thank you. Can you give our viewers a sense of what to expect when it comes to the kind of surge that we're likely to see with Omicron in India?
Thank you, Rahul. It's great to see you, and I want to wish happy holidays to your viewers.
These are not such happy holidays. I must tell you that a lot of people, including me, have had to cancel our holiday plans. No matter what the bookings were, we're now locked up here in Delhi, and that's not a happy situation. So it's not such a happy holiday, but as I said to Dr. Jha, we must try and make the most that we can. With friends, with family, with whoever's around, just try and be together, safe, and that's crucial. But please go on, ma'am.
That's very important. So I myself have holiday plans, and I had to change that because of the viral blizzard that we are seeing in Michigan right now. But I think that we have to adapt, because this is sort of not just me. What I do actually affects the outcome of others. So we do have to take that social responsibility, and I'm glad that you're making the wise choices, Rahul. So I do think that the wave is going to look very different for India. I think there is lack of data in terms of how many breakthroughs are happening in India right now, and what percentage of those cases are actually requiring hospitalization. I do think that's the key. We cannot obsess on the number of infections right now, because Omicron is highly transmissible. It's causing a lot of reinfection and breakthrough infection. So I think I'll really watch out and track the hospital admissions. And if there are increases in hospital admissions, I will do my best in order to intensify public health measures. I also want to say that, yes, many people have vaccines, many people have natural immunity. So we are in a much better situation than last year in April or June. But I would not like, personally, I'd not like to get Omicron infection or any kind of COVID, because so many things are unknown. Many of my friends are saying we are going to wing it. But I personally do not know the consequences, the long COVID. I do not want to fall sick in a period of 1 week, everybody falling sick, including healthcare workers. Then I will not get the care that I need. So I'm going to use all caution. And I know that masks work against all variants. So that's sort of my armor right now, in spite of being boosted.
I don't mean to be irrational or unscientific, but I want to ask a question which I'm sure is in the minds of many. And the question, ma'am, is this. If Omicron is indeed much milder than the Delta variant, and if it's going to come and go like a blizzard, and if cases in South Africa are already falling, then do we need to be as paranoid as we're being asked to be at the moment? If we have some kind of immunity because of vaccination, some kind of immunity because many of us contracted COVID naturally, and therefore the body's built up a certain amount of immunity, is the threat of Omicron being overstated by the medical community as a matter of abundant precaution?
Yes, so I think I have been writing about this, that there is a middle ground. And throughout this pandemic, I think we have been sort of failing to chart this middle ground, which is not of panic, but of prudence. As I mentioned that, yes, the data shows that the cases have been mild so far, but it is really hard to tease apart whether Omicron is intrinsically less lethal than Delta, or the population has changed in terms of its composition of immunity, right? It's completely confounded. We cannot tease that apart. we also do not know long-term consequences. Personally, I am a little concerned that if everybody falls sick at the same time, even a smaller fraction of people getting really sick, and I'm talking about the vulnerable, the high risk, the elderly, then they're not going to get the care because the healthcare system will be so overwhelmed. So that's the thing I want to avoid. The principle of public health is really to try to save every life if you can. So I think that timing matters. If we hunker down on our behaviors, wear masks, avoid large indoor gatherings, form our own bubbles with family, I think we can get through this without massive devastation like we saw. So I think we have to be pragmatic. But timing really matters. So I think it's time to hunker down now, though it's not optimal in terms of the festivities.
Basis the modeling that you've been doing, what are your forecasts for what the Omicron wave in India will look like? When do you anticipate the peak? By when do you think cases will start to decline? And when does this nightmare end according to your latest projections?
Yeah, this is very hard to do right now because that's why I have been tweeting frantically. There are some key parameters which we really need. So, for example, the booster discussion, right? So it has been shown that if you have a booster dose, you have protection against severity and also some infection protection. So with India, nobody has boosters, but I do believe that many people have had 2 vaccines and 1 infection. These 3 kits sort of can give you more of a protection, and that number estimation really determines what percentage are going to need hospitalization. I do expect that the cases are going to rise, but we should not be highly alarmed by the rise in the cases necessarily. But I think some information we have to closely track is that what percentage of cases are in the vaccinated, and people who are unvaccinated really try to get them at least 1 shot. It will keep them out of the hospital. It will prevent them for severe long COVID and other consequences. So I do think that
Professor Mukherjee,
cases are going to rise.
With respect, that was a very vague answer to a very specific question. You're doing modeling. I'm asking you, according to the models that you're doing right now, what could the case count in India look like? You could give us your baseline projections, you could give us your worst case scenario, your middle of the road projection, but how, in comparison with Delta, how bad, ceteris paribus, things being the way that they are, how bad do you think Omicron could be?
So, models have assumptions and models are wrinkled with assumptions, and you do not have good data to feed into the model. They're not going to serve your purpose in terms of policy making. So I do think that it all depends on what percentage of India are susceptible again. So the rate of reinfection and the rate of breakthrough infection. We can borrow data from South Africa, from United Kingdom, but we really need to contextualize and understand that what is really the immunity landscape in India at a population level looking like. So I do expect that the cases are going to rise in January and February, but if we do the right thing right now, I do not expect the hospitals to be overwhelmed. That would be a vague answer, but that's all I can tell you. I do not want to overstretch my conclusions.
So I just think you're being careful. You have numbers which you aren't sharing with us, probably because you're worried that you'll be held accountable to those numbers, but because it's important and it concerns our health, I'll press you again. According to some projections done by the supermodeling committee in India, they projected that the wave would come towards the end of February and that there would be a rapid decline. It will be a 3-week up and down, sharp surge, but a rapid decline kind of wave. Why I'm asking, Professor Mukherjee, is this: are you reading numbers the same way? Is it your estimate that there will be a sharp surge, and by when? Obviously, we don't have perfect data, and obviously the numbers that your models throw up depends on the data that is available and how accurate the data is. But given what we know, as we know it, as things stand in this moment, when do you anticipate this wave, the surge and the peak?
Yeah, you were pressing me to say things that I do not want to say. So if you recall very clearly that when everybody was projecting the 3rd wave in fall, right after the 2nd wave, our models never predicted a 3rd wave and continuous decline. And that's what has happened. So right now, I think there are too many unknowns, and I am not going to commit. I'm not going to held accountable because I have never been afraid to be accountable when I feel fairly confident about the parameters of the model. Right now, I don't know, and I think that there will be an increase in January and February, but there is a lot of unknowns, and so I'm not going to say anything, Rahul. Sorry to disappoint you.
No, which is fine. I respect that, and it's better to say publicly that you're not certain rather than, and I hate it when sometimes opinion pollsters do it, they're completely off and yet they'd very confidently make a projection as if they're certain that that's exactly what happened. So I'm glad that you're being careful, and that's the difference between polling for an election and actually being a biostatistician who's looking at this very, very carefully. Now, I want to come back to the issue of boosters.
I also want to mention one thing, that throughout this pandemic, so many COVID curveballs have been thrown at us. I have, by these 2 years, have acquired a humility of knowledge. So, and also it depends on what we do right now. And I'm happy to see that people are anxious, people are trying to stay and do the right things based on our past experience.
No, humility is very important because many people thought that Delta was the worst and that there may be a wave, but it won't be that big, and that there definitely won't be panic again like there was during Delta. And now we're seeing what's happening in the UK, what's happening in the US, what happened in South Africa. And we're saying, okay, maybe it wasn't the worst. And I saw Bill Gates' tweet. Bill Gates' tweet said that Omicron will be the worst and then things will start getting better. Do you share that? He's not a man of science, but he has access to a lot of top insights. Do you share that that perception that Omicron could be worse than Delta?
So there are a couple of things. First of all, I do think that to claim, as many people did, that by the end of the year, COVID will become like flu or it will become endemic was too premature. And I have said that over and over again. In my lifetime, I'd never think of COVID as a flu, just because I have seen so much sickness, so much grief, so much loss, so much complications down the road with long COVID. So this is not a very easy disease that you are just going to get it and wing it. I do think that Omicron is stressing the healthcare system, even in Michigan, because we sort of are at a different point than 2 years ago. We were getting used to normal life. Many of us went back to classroom teaching, and now there is a setback. So there is a moral and also emotional and mental disappointment with this setback. And I do think that we are going to go through a very difficult winter because of the cases surging. But my hope is that with the vaccines and with the natural immunity, we are not going to see so much sickness and death. But we should really ramp up and prepare our healthcare capacity so that we can give the needed care to people who actually get COVID. With the treatments of COVID, the oral antivirals, they are coming. And if we can really brace ourselves, I do think that the worst probably is going to be over by the beginning of 2022. That's what my projection will be.
You're saying this could go on for a full year after Omicron? You expect more waves, even if they're not of the same size, and this goes on till the end of all of next year?
I said beginning of 2022, the first half of 2022, I think. There will be probably milder waves. And I think the pandemics actually have an oscillatory behavior. They fade. They do not drastically drop out at a discrete point of time.
Professor Brahma Mukherjee, I wish you a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, even if it's not the holiday that you'd planned earlier, but as long as you're with friends, family, you're safe.
Yes.
That's what matters most. And I thank you for your time. Thank you very much for joining us. Appreciate your time. I want to go across now.
Thank you so much, Rahul.
Live to New York. Joining us from there is Ian Lipkin. Ian Lipkin is one of the world's best-known virologists. He heads Columbia University's Center for Infectious Diseases and Immunity. He was the chief scientific consultant to the film Contagion. He, in fact, predicted that there'd be a pandemic of the nature that we're seeing with some variations, and that's exactly what we find ourselves still in the midst of. He's been a guest at the India Today Conclave, and we're very privileged to have him back. Professor Lipkin, thank you so much for your time, sir, and welcome back.
My pleasure.
I hope you've been well. I hope your loved ones have been well too.
Happy holidays.
Yes, it's not much of a holiday. That's a touchy topic. We're here working, having to cancel our holiday plans, but we'll leave that for another time. Tell me this, In a worst case scenario basis, how bad is Omicron in your view? We saw Bill Gates tweet yesterday to say that Omicron will be the worst of the COVID pandemic, and after this things will get better. Implicit to his argument is the suggestion that Omicron will be worse than the Delta wave. Is that the way you're seeing this current variant as well?
I think we need to define worse. If we mean, is it more infectious? Yes. Does that mean that more people will become infected? Yes. Does it mean that if you're vaccinated, you can still become infected? Yes. Does that mean that this virus causes more severe disease in people who are partially immune or fully immune? No. So if you are not vaccinated and if you've never seen the virus with a previous infection, then the chances are that if you become infected with Omicron, you're going to have severe disease, particularly if you fall into the categories that we've already known are associated with more disease. On the other hand, if you've been previously infected or you've been fully vaccinated, particularly you've been boosted with either the adenovirus vaccines, such as Covishield that's made in India, or you're receiving an RNA vaccine, the chances are that if you become infected, you're going to have milder disease. So Delta was different in that we saw severe disease and we saw a more contagious virus. This virus is more contagious, but may be less capable of causing severe disease.
If you can, we've read the scientific papers, but for everyone watching, if you can simplify as much as you can, how and why is Omicron different from Delta? If people have to take precautions, what should they be keeping in mind in terms of why and how Omicron is different from what we've seen so far?
So just starting with the virus itself, Omicron has mutations in a variety of regions within the genome, primarily in the portion of the virus that attaches to the outside of cells. Think of it like Velcro. It's got more teeth. It's able to attach more efficiently and then get into cells. It also has some substitutions in other portions of the genome that may make it more capable of reproducing itself in the nose and in the upper respiratory tract, as opposed to in the lungs. So this is a kind of a mixed blessing. It means that you're producing more of it. It's easier to generate the virus and to transmit the virus, but it also reduces the possibility that the virus is going to cause severe disease, particularly if you've had a previous exposure either to the vaccine or to the virus itself. Now, what does this mean in terms of protecting yourself? There are several aspects of this to consider. The first is that because there are going to be many people who are infected, but who are asymptomatic or have a sniffle, we have to be more judicious about gathering. We have to be careful about the types of masks we use. So any mask is better than no mask at all, but the masks that seal properly and prevent you from breathing around the sides are going to be more efficient. The best of them are the N95 masks or the KN95 masks. If you have access to those, use them. If you don't have access to those, then double up on masks so that you're clear that you're able to protect yourself, because less gets in and less gets out. So that's one thing I think that is critical. The other thing is that large gatherings are very risky. So if you assume, for example, that 10% of the population, some large crowd, may be infected, the possibility that you're going to encounter somebody who is infected is much higher. Now, in this video that you're showing, some people aren't wearing masks at all. Oh, this is a problem. And we used to think that being outside was sufficient. I never really thought so, but there were people who did. But that's clearly not true if you've got a scrum of people who are all together exchanging air. That's the problem. So if you're not vaccinated, you must get vaccinated. If you've been boosted, great. If you're not boosted, get boosted. And during the interim, make certain that you mask and try to avoid large gatherings. That is all we can do. Now, you raise the question of, what I think of, Bill Gates' predictions. He's remarkably accurate. In the course of this pandemic, he's been very, very good. And even before, amongst all the various lay people I know, he has been interested in this and focused on this and has invested heavily in trying to reduce pandemic risk. That said, no one has a crystal ball. Now, my view of Omicron is that this virus is so well adapted to humans that virtually everybody in the world will be exposed at some point. It's just not going away. Now, does it look like seasonal flu? Not really, because as Professor Mukherjee said earlier, there's this other aspect to this infection that people don't much talk about. And that is what we call long COVID, or the post-acute syndrome associated with this infection, which can give you persistent headaches, muscle pains. It can interfere with your cognition. It can have an impact on your daily life in ways that other viruses typically don't. So even if you escape unscathed from major damage, you can still wind up with this post-COVID syndrome, which frankly can be very, very difficult. So people should take this very, very seriously. Now, the other point, which really is critical, is testing. Because so many people are asymptomatic or have mild disease, we need to be able to have tests that we can implement rapidly that allow us to reduce the risk if we're going to get together with people in close quarters. And I will say one of the remarkable things about biotechnology and pharma in India is because for years you have had people investing in this area. You have very good diagnostic companies. You have good sequencing companies. You have vaccine companies, the largest vaccine company in the world. So you really should be positioned, I think, with the appropriate investments to protect your people.
How long do you think Omicron will go on for, on the basis of all that you know so far? When do you see this nightmare end?
If you take a look at what happened in South Africa and what happened in the UK, what's happening in New York, this virus, unlike the previous ones, takes off like a rocket. It is rapidly replacing all of the other virus variants that we know of to date, with, such as Delta, for example. And it would not surprise me at all if this thing worked its way through the entire world by, the middle of next year. But again, that all depends on how people behave. So when you were asking Professor Mukherjee to model, there's so many unknowns in terms of the data inputs that it's difficult to predict. But we do know that this is the most infectious virus that we've had thus far, and that it could conceivably spread globally in a way that we've never seen before with any other viral infection.
Why?
So could we?
Why is this different from all the viruses you've studied, and this is what you do? Why is Omicron different from everything we've seen so far?
Because it is so infectious. That's the thing. I mean, what we try to do is understand how viruses spread. The viruses that are the most infectious are the ones that are spread by the respiratory tract: measles, smallpox, SARS-1, SARS-2, influenza. There's a wide range of them. When we compare the rate at which this virus grows, where it grows, its ability to spread, the amount that's contained in a sneeze or a cough, this is the most contagious virus that we've seen thus far. This is why it's spreading so rapidly. But it is in our power as humans to get this under control. But it requires that we think not only of ourselves, but of others as well. So you need to, even if you feel well, you need to test continuously. If you're infected, you need to isolate. If you can't isolate, then you need to wear masks. If there's a possibility for vaccination, you must take it, even if you think that this is something that you don't need. This requires that people care about one another. And it's a very different sort of a way of thinking about things, but we have to think of ourselves as a species that's at risk. And India leads the way in this philosophically, theologically. This should not be a difficult sale.
Do you have a sense of what the post-Omicron world could look like? I asked this to basically press you on whether there could be an other variant like Omicron. We saw Delta, there's Omicron, there could be some other character that emerges and then engulfs all of us. Or do you think that as far as this pandemic is concerned, after the third wave, we're unlikely to see another wave which surges in a crazy fashion and then spreads all through the world?
So the question is whether or not there's a possibility that there could be another virus that is even more contagious. I don't think that we're going to see a more contagious virus. What I am concerned about is virus that might evolve that would have other kinds of aspects to it that would make it more capable of causing serious disease. That hasn't happened yet, but if a virus, for example, developed in such a way that it could interfere with the ability to make an immune response, and there are viruses that have these immunosuppressive components, that would be a large problem. There could be viruses that would evolve that would have the ability to evade some of the drugs that are now coming online. That would be a huge problem. And this is why we need to continue to do surveillance to look for the potential emergence of these viruses. The other issue, of course, although I don't like to bring this up because it frightens people, is that this is not the last of emerging infectious diseases with which we have to be concerned. And there is a program that I've been promoting every time I go to India, starting with, work that I did in Goa and then in Mumbai and then Delhi and so on. We need a global immune system. We need better cooperation between ICMR and Pakistan and Indonesia, and the US, Germany, and Brazil, everywhere all over the world. Whenever a new infectious agent emerges, we need to be able to share the data. We need to be able to share the insights that are required to respond in an actionable way. And I make this plea every time I come on your broadcast. Please, if you want to work on this, if you want to join this global alliance, be in touch with me. I'm easy to find. We want to ensure that everybody everywhere has the toolkit necessary to identify infectious agents, bacteria, viruses, whatever, and respond to them rapidly and efficiently. We're all in this together. The other issue about vaccination, which I think is key, is that people tend to focus, particularly in the developed nations, right, on getting a third booster and a fourth booster and so forth. The fact of the matter is, until everyone is vaccinated, no one is safe. This variant, Omicron, probably arose in somebody who was persistently infected in an area where they did not have vaccines. And you see what it does. Anything, anywhere is rapidly everywhere.
From what you're saying, and if we have to look out for more infectious diseases in the future, and your predictions have been right in the past, are you suggesting that we may never go back to the world philosophically in the way that it was? That there would be a new world order where wearing masks, for example, is just standard operating procedure, and it could be several years before we go back to hugging, shaking people's hands, not having to worry about masks, being able to sit together. Is that essentially what you're saying, Professor? Professor Ian Limpkin?
There are certain times of the year when the risk is higher. I've been traveling, for example, for many years in Japan, where people wear masks during respiratory disease season. And they were doing this 20 years ago. They've done this since 1918, right, with the first flu pandemic that we were concerned with. So That is not something which I think, is a bad thing. I think the other thing is we do need to wash our hands more often. There are a whole series of things. We could talk for hours about what we need to do. But it's just like global warming. Are we going to go back to driving, polluting cars again? No, probably not. We have to think more cautiously about what we do worldwide. And everything you do impacts me and vice versa.
Last but not least, on the back of Omicron, how long do you see? Do you have any numbers for India? The wave in India, we're seeing in South Africa, it went up for 3 weeks and then came down, and that seems to be different from what happened during Delta. Do you have any particular numbers for India about when you see cases starting to surge in India, and by when do you see, in India particularly, the case count then once again coming under control?
So the issue is, when you try to make predictions about how things are going to spread, there are many social factors to consider as well. So if Prime Minister Modi decided to impose some sort of a shutdown, I'm not saying he should or shouldn't, that's above me. But if something like that were to occur, you would see a dramatic drop in cases. And it would be very rapid, it would be in a matter of days to weeks. If that doesn't happen, if the virus continues to spread rapidly throughout India, I would expect that just like in South Africa, that it would peak much more rapidly than did Delta. I mean, we're dealing with Delta months down the line. I don't think that's going to be the case with Omicron. I think it is going to spread much more rapidly because it can spread in people who've already been vaccinated. So what is the peak going to be? I mean, it's conceivably possible that the majority of your population could be infected with Omicron. This is not out of the realm of possibility. Now, what would the impact of that be? That's sort of the most important thing. If people have previously seen this virus or a vaccine to it, majority of them will have mild disease. Nonetheless, there are people who've not seen the virus. They may have severe disease, and this can incapacitate your healthcare systems, overwhelm your hospitals, and then you have people who become ill and sometimes even, die as a consequence of not being able to get care for a difficult childbirth or a heart attack, whatever you care to consider. So these are very, very difficult problems logistically as well as scientifically.
Lastly, opinion in the government of India is divided over whether kids should be given vaccines and whether adults should be given a booster dose. They're thinking about it, they haven't taken a decision. On the basis of what you know, do you think that's a mistake? Do you think the government should post-haste, to the extent possible, start boosting people who've been vaccinated previously and ensuring they have some additional protection, some kind of bulletproof protection?
I think that if you have the doses of vaccine to do boosting, this is something that you should do. And with respect to children, for whatever we know to be safe in children, where you have smaller doses that are required, I would recommend that you do that as well. But it's very important to stay with the data that we understand and to be efficient in using those data to dictate your policy.
Professor Lipkin, you have a sense of clarity which is alarming at one level but eye-opening at another. I'm glad you accepted our invitation and made the effort of joining us on the Newstrack. You've in fact, in the minutes that we've spoken, been able to give some very sharp insights about what's likely to happen and why. And I appreciate you taking out time. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Well, I look forward to seeing you in New Delhi.
Will you fly or would you just not fly at this moment? Are you taking flights?
Well, I'm not going to swim.
No, for people who are traveling and wondering whether it's safe and worth taking the risk, what would Ian Lipkin suggest?
I think so. In my view, you can fly safely. You have to take the appropriate precautions. You need to make sure that the airline is considering the possibilities of airborne transmission with appropriate ventilation. You need to wear N95 masks. You don't relax your vigilance and start drinking alcohol and start hanging out in the aisles talking to people. But can you fly safely? I think everything is measured risk. But would I fly? Yes, I would. And I have to fly again. So, we have to learn to live with this new world.
For your clarity, for your thoughts, for your insights, and for your time, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Bye. Be safe.
And you too, please. I benefited immensely from this conversation about the last 45 odd minutes. I hope that it gave you insights to questions which have been in your mind, but you didn't really know what the right answer was. There is no right answer, but the three experts that we've heard from really carry the weight of medical evidence and data as they see it. And this is really as high quality possibly gets at this moment. So thank you for tuning in. I appreciate your time. And I look forward to seeing you at 8 p.m. tomorrow evening. Stay safe, stay well, mask up.